Okay, welcome to today's webinar, just to chat about the North American trade war to establish Fortress America. I'd like this discussion maybe to focus not just on the character who declared the war and then paused it, but the content of what presumably was driving. But there's obviously a lot going on, and we're trying to get some sense. It was Bill last week who, in a newsletter and then subsequent webinar and our dinner, who introduced us to the concept of Fortress America that I've messed up by from time to time calling it Fortress North America, but that's if Canada is asked to join in or wants to join in. So welcome Bill, welcome Mel, Bud, Peter, Trudy, Dale, and of course Randall. So I have been astounded that the energy that's going into this is as broad and as deep as it is, but I've been surprised by a couple of things, and I'll share with you some of the statistics that I've seen lately. One of them being we assumed that the trade war that was being launched had something to do with the imbalance of trade, or something to do with manufacturing, or something to do with fentanyl going over the border, or immigrants. It's behooved me that it lacked focus, and Americans seem to feel it lacked focus too. 42% of Americans said they don't know what this is all about. They don't know what the objective is. But one of the things that's been achieved, and this is fascinating, is 49% of Canadians before the trade war seemed to care about the future of Canada. After the announcement by Trump of the trade war, it went up to 59%. So he's, through this trade war, or the pause or otherwise, he's helped Canada in a number of ways, which I call the silver lining. We seem to be helping others get to know a little bit better what Canada is. We seem ourselves to be paying a little bit more attention to what Canada is or is not in order to address and fix things like interprovincial trade, maybe defense of our borders, maybe the fact we've got a drug war and don't even know it. Someone brought to my attention, and I'll do a webinar on this in a couple of weeks, that the amount of production of fentanyl that has been detected going across the border implies it's going someplace else. It's either going across the border not being detected, or it's finding its way in and around Canada. Either way, we may have a big problem and not even realize it, and that may be another advantage. Trump may know more about some of the things going on in Canada than we as the public do. So I've thrown a number of things out there. Who wants to jump in and add more or less? Go ahead, Peter.
I think, pardon me, I think this rapid start to his administration and the rather confusing in the sense of many directions is on purpose to try and create as much confusion as possible in order to do other things that we don't know about. And I think that this appointment of Musk to a department that doesn't officially exist and now is starting to, fire tens of thousands of people is certainly something that's underhanded and being done because all this turmoil that's being created is to hide some of these things.
Well, the media is well aware of it. I mean, what Musk may well be doing, the media is following him like a hound dog.
Well, yes, I realize that.
I'm of somewhat of a different opinion, always being a bit of a provocateur. I think his style, I think people are well aware that his style will ultimately wear people out.
Well, that's what he did the first time.
And like
You tell the same lie enough, and it becomes the truth.
Well, I'm making a slightly different point. At some point in time, this style is going to become boring, so repetitive, so noisy, so in your face, so 24/7, that I think I think they're in a rush because they know full well that this isn't going to and can't last. Even the Republican Party at some point in time is going to say enough is enough. Bill, when you introduced us to Fortress America, and by the way, it's a phrase that was introduced in 2017 by a writer who was really talking about what was going on internally to America, and that America, in order to address some of the internal problems they were having, needed to button itself down. But you've introduced the topic on a broader sense, noting what's going on with China in terms of competition with the United States economically and whether they can withstand it or not. And that $42 trillion debt that these issues are so significant that the United States cannot continue to be the adventure that it has been in terms of foreign interventions and spending the amount of money that has been spent by a couple of regimes now. That debt is unsustainable at $200 billion a year in interest payments.
Correct. Correct. I read a very interesting article today defining the difference between what Trump sees as a negotiating tactic. So he's a distributive negotiator. In other words, there's a single pie. Perry and I fight and negotiate on how much of that pie one of us gets. And so it's a win-lose. And that's what Trump tends to focus on. If he gets the deal that he thinks he wins and Perry takes a cut, he walks away happy. The challenge with the Trump mentality is in international relationships, a deal is not made on a single deal. In other words, in economic theory, you want to play the game more than once. So if Perry and I get into an arrangement and I mess up Perry and make a mess of it and I screw him, yeah, I win and Perry loses. But Perry and everyone else he knows will never deal with me. In deal making, it's more than one game. You need to play more than one game to be successful. So if I treat Perry fairly, other people will play with me. And that means other deals. And more deals happen, and more people want to play the game with me. And Trump doesn't work that way. And international relationships, because the interconnections of the international trade hasn't, and this is to his detriment, has brought his business acumen. For example, I will hire a plumber to fix whatever plumbing happens, and we make an agreement on the price. And at the end of and he's fixed it and everything's fine, I go to him and say, hey, you're going to take a 50% haircut. I'm going to pay 50%. Well, he's not in much of a negotiating point, and he'll take the 50%, and I'll never use him again because I've got more than one plumber that I can go to and do the same action. But in international trade, there's only one Canada, there's only one Britain, there's only one Europe, there's only one China. And if you make a mess with Canada, they're just not interested to make the next deal. And then who else are you going to make the deal with? So you can play the distributive tactic with an economy or a system that has lots of alternatives. And, the scammer, that's what he plays on, right? He can scam exactly one person exactly once, but there's 1,000 people to scam. But you only can scam one person once when there's only one person to scam, and then you never make another deal. And that is his flaw. And so if we integrate that to what he's thinking about Fortress America, Fortress North America, that is in the scope of the desire to move that policy forward, his biggest flaw.
I think that may well explain why he attacked Mexico and Canada for starters, because we're locked in. We are North America. We're not Europe with 30 different countries. The relationship is one-on-one with not a lot of alternatives. So Canada isn't in a position to call on its neighbors or to immediately, in short order, redistribute its goods and form new trading relationships. So we're going to be in a one-on-one discussion with him as a nation. The interesting thing is we did discover something in the course of that first round of negotiation, if you want to call that. We discovered Canada itself. We discovered that we've got a number of partners called our provinces that if they could work together, could form a more unified voice than a segregated or separated voice. And I think the game may well, if it was intentional or not, have blown up in his face, expecting to see more separation among the provinces, where in fact they became more unified. I mean, Danielle at 10% was more than willing to play the game as one Canada. In the course of this week, before and after the trade war was ceased, at least temporarily, I felt personally that I needed to find some levity. And I didn't turn to liquor. I just turned to what one does when you try and find humor in something. And I did find some humor, and I'll share it with you. And it's fun, and I wrote a little piece up on it. I shared it with a few people and it's called The Two Dons, Don Quixote and Donald Trump, both of them flailing after phantoms, one being windmills and the other being banks that are not allowed to operate in Canada when in fact they are, automotive trade imbalances which are flooding into the US when they're not, fentanyl, which seemed to be at a small quantity versus 1/1000th of what was going on in Mexico. So I wrote a little piece about the parallel between Donald Trump and Donald Quixote. And I shared it with a few people. It made me laugh for a little bit. And these are things that happen when you're not sleeping well at night. But then as the week wore on, and I saw the challenges that are out there on a world scale, I would not want to be an international leader today. Not that I ever wanted to be one, but if you imagine what forces are impacting leaders around the world today, from economics to social issues to geopolitical matters to environmental, the number of the forces and sources of change that and technology that they're having to deal with and find their bearing or find their focus is almost impossible. And so my other article is sympathy for leadership. And that may be provocative because I don't hear a lot of people expressing sympathy for Donald Trump. But if you put yourself in his shoes, not as an entertainer, but as someone trying to handle all of the things that must come into his office each day or anticipate, this is not an easy challenge that he's created for himself in many ways. He seems to be more than willing to move on many fronts simultaneously, which is why the 150 executive orders and why the pace. And the pace is probably because he's tackling so many things at once, Peter.
But he's trying to deliberately create confusion. This is my point.
Yeah,
This is part of something yet to unfold. Like, let's create the confusion, and then we'll do some more stuff that's maybe part of 2025 or something else beyond it. But this is just the stage to set the stage to stir the pot.
But my point is, what is it he should ignore? Because all of these are important. The fire, whether it be fires or earthquakes or geopolitical events or wars, what should he ignore? The United States is right smack in the middle of all of this.
Well, he's already threatening to disband FEMA. So that takes care of hurricanes and disasters, earthquakes, etc. The states have to take responsibility now. That's what his view is.
Okay, so
that takes care of $1 trillion probably or at least $500 million at least per year of what they need. I think that they'll cancel the Artemis program by NASA because Musk wants to go directly to Mars and not go by the moon. So watch for that too.
I appreciate Peter, very intelligent man and very articulate on the points. I would challenge the concept of sowing confusion. I don't think Donald Trump, and to be more specific and to reflect Perry's wisdom, the U.S. administrations is not there to sow confusion. There is a plan. It's very direct. He has approximately 100 days to hammer the nails into the structure of this plan, that 100-day sweetheart time where he can pretty much do whatever he wants. And then the dark state or the bureaucratic and legislative bureaucracy starts engaging. U.S. aid, for example, closing them off and then instantly exposing so much of the graft and corruption within it. It isn't to create confusion. I think it's to expose the corruption and graft and the legislative branch of the government, your bureaucracy, on the wild and broad power that they have, which is outside of the control of the Congress and the Senate and the executive administration of the United States. So we might see it as trying to sow confusion, but it's a disruptor, not an agent of disruption, not an agent of just stirring the pot for the heck of it, which is trying to sow confusion.
Well, the breadth of what
Well, I agree, Bill. If I may, Perry, I agree, Bill, with much of your assessment. But I honestly think that the initiative is, and we'll see. I mean, I can totally. I hope I'm wrong, actually, but I can see that what's going on because I look at all of these different things. So they're all weighing in the same weight as far as I can see. They're all absolutely got to work right away. So I mean, and just sort of the way in which he develops his ideas. I mean, maybe he's just not mature enough in the sense of what a president's role should be. Because here he announced this takeover of Gaza in all kinds of detail, and he hadn't even consulted with anyone. Even his own staff were shocked by it. So he just shoots from the hip whenever it wants. And with all that kind of confusion, that's why I feel there's just building a massive amount of confusion. And I do feel there's a plan. And that's what we're seeing in the first 100 days.
So I think, Peter, your perspective is very accurate. He does shoot from his hip because that's the business model that he's always worked for. Throws out an idea, sees where it bounces, and then whether fly the flag on the flagpole and see where it goes, and that's his mode. And you're absolutely articulate and correct that in international diplomacy, when you're the global hegemony and as such, it does cause confusion to other parties because it is not what they expect. Diplomacy is subtle, is backroom, calm talk,
Gradual.
very particular words, because words are very important in diplomacy. And he definitely does not have the skill of that level of diplomacy where a single word makes a huge difference on the matter. And so I can completely agree that he's sowing confusion everywhere in the world, but I would debate that he is confused. There is a goal in what he's acting on, and he's just the bull in the china shop, not articulated in international diplomacy and the nuances of it, and just burrowing through every barrier that he sees. Now, that is, in fact, a tactic. When you're doing power politics, diplomacy falls second place. And as he's shown, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Panama, his power politics has reinforced to him that this is a very viable tactic, much like the German attack with the Blitzkrieg. Hey, it works here, works there, works there, until it doesn't. And as much as I see what Fortress America and Fortress North America is happening, there is a risk that Trump, in driving the Fortress whatever forward, might himself have a flaw in the axle, and it might break because of his hubris and his attitude and his inexperience in dealing with the nuances of diplomacy.
Looking at all of what you have just said and trying to come to grips with simplifying it in some way. When he is tackling as many things as he is at once, there's a message out there that there are a lot of problems that have been left to be fixed. So if you look at it as a sane man doing rational things, he's saying we got big problems and we got a lot of them. And he's also saying you elected me because I was the bad guy, not the good guy. And you elected me because I was going to execute power to fix big problems. I am acknowledging that you gave me the power and I am taking on the problems just as you expected me to do. So I suspect there's a lot of Americans that are very happy that he is not sitting in, now that he's been elected, to say, okay, I have now achieved my objective. Getting elected as president was not his objective at all. His
That's
objective
correct, Eric.
was to make
Yeah.
change. And he is doing it on a very broad front. And as you say, from time to time, he's going to shoot from the hip. I think Netanyahu, and he had a conversation, by the way, I don't think this was necessarily his idea. And we can get into whether or not it has merit or not, because the world certainly reacted. But in that reaction, he's also softened up the opportunity for diplomacy because he's thrown a whole new idea on the table.
And excellent.
Perry, as you probably know, as others as well, when it's been widely reported by the media, for this matter, is that when Trump meets with somebody, whether it's a foreign dignitary or an advisor of his own, it tends to be the last person he talks to that becomes his first public speak about whatever the subject matter is. So yes, he was with Netanyahu, and his first public speak was, well, we should take Gaza. So,
Right,
maybe nobody else had it except he and Netanyahu.
And we have to realize this is it's only happened once in US history where a president has been reelected after being defeated. And typically in the American system, the second term ends up to be somewhat of a subdued, lame duck administration that its focus is to set up either the vice president or the anointed to carry on that next administration. We saw that with Obama into Clinton, though unsuccessful, where their effort is not so much on the executive action and the governance, it's to extend another 4 years. So it's typically a 4-year quiet, working to create another 4 years of action, 4 years of quiet, 4 years of action. With Trump's loss, the whole system under him has completely changed. His last 4 years is not to anoint a new upcomer, which is probably Vance regardless, but it is action. He was stymied in his first 4 years, and he's been paused for 4 years, and now he's full action. He's not looking at the next election. He's not looking at the next anointed. He is action. And this is where I think within the American politics is abnormal. They are expecting a subdued, just like Obama's second term, a subdued second term that's creating a circumstance for a transfer of power to an ally, and he's not concerned. He doesn't care. There is no up and comer. Again, Vance is open for it, but he doesn't care what comes after his second term. He is pushing forward, not a lame duck, but a lion. And that is not typical in American politics.
Now, in the chat function, Randall and I think Greg commented on it, and Jeff for sure, have referenced Project 2025, which at one point in time was denied, but that may well, in fact, be the plan.
This is the right-wing wish list.
Sure.
Talks about where it came from. They invested 22 million US in developing the plan. They're talking about tearing down government, the FBI, the Department of Government Efficiency, the White House. This was written 3 days ago, so they kind of mapped everything in the past to what's happened in the last week or so. Abortion and family, has that been on the screen? How about immigration?
Reading through it. Yeah, we just
How
saw
about
it.
energy and climate and trade? Education, they haven't even attacked the Board of Education yet, but that's going to be disappeared. The tech game, the DEI is already there. This isn't a ring here. This is stuff has all been spelt out in black and white last summer, and they're just acting on this. This isn't about a knee-jerk Donald Trump just blowing up everything he gets his hands on.
This is terrific to get this Project 25 now in front of us, but I don't think any of us have been saying that that everything he's doing is just knee-jerk without a plan. I think we've been saying there is a plan, whether or not the plan's articulated as Fortress America, with Project 2025 being the rule book. But I think way too many people are simply focusing on him and his style without regard to the specifics of Project 2025 or the specifics of Fortress America. If you, and I think you, Bill, you said it at the dinner, you got to take this, you got to take what he says seriously.
Correct. And this is different than, say, the Monroe Doctrine, which was well articulated and communicated diplomatically to the Europeans, who intimately understood what that meant. So the Monroe Doctrine was exercised, a little bit of tension with Spain, but the irony with that is Spain agreed with the Monroe Doctrine, and with Yellow Press was accelerated. So they weren't any dispute of American hegemony in the Americas. Just an interesting part of history, how things happen. And that's, as a part, is something we have to be aware of, is the, as it was said before, the unknown unknowns. When you start forcing such things, other things happen that you have no plan for. And we're dealing with human beings and not rocks, so we can't predict their behavior. And things can suddenly pop up within a doctrine that have not been planned for. But the doctrine is clear, though not articulated widely. And it is interesting to me why that plan has not been articulated widely. Project 2025 is a subset. It is not the defining document. What pieces of that 2025 might apply, they'll use, and what doesn't, they'll discard. But the overarching Fortress America doctrine will make those decisions on top of everything else. And it really defines where Trump is going. And understanding that, we can see where he will go and what point, which is why he's so relaxing when he threatens tariffs, and a little bit of subservience, for a bit lack of a better word, from Canada. Okay, we'll delay it by 30 days. He's not interested in a trade war. He's interested in policy change. He's a hammer. He's discovered there's only one hammer he can use internationally, and that's tariffs. And when you're a hammer, everything is a nail, and you hit it like a nail, regardless what it is. And that's what he's really using as a broad stroke. There's no other weapon internationally that he can force these type of policies. And so he's using what he's got, and that's what we're seeing.
So I'd like to shift one observation, and then I'd like to shift the discussion more to internal to Canada, what this means to Canada, what we're doing about it, what we might do about it. But the speed with which he is moving and the number of things that he's taking on seem to have absolutely overwhelmed the capacity of the Democrats to have a voice on any of this. And even the media, I can see the media seems to be scrambling because they don't know which particular issue of the many issues that show up each day to grab hold of. So he's created a lot of confusion among those that used to have a pretty good handle on, well, that's the issue for this week or this month. He's got them on their heels.
Yes, the Democratic Party has been destroyed. Their failure in this election was so absolute, it's game changing. I would throw out, and I would take bets on, that we're looking at least 12 years of Republican Party control of both the executive, the Senate, and the House.
Okay, Bill, do you think the same thing is going to happen in Canada? Because what was concluded with the Democrats was the social engineering. That's why they got knocked down.
Correct.
And that's what Trump's been doing, or Trudeau's been doing for the last 12 years.
Correct. Now, Canada is a different animal. Our government is chosen by a very small area, not by area, by population very large, but by area, which is our Laurentian elite. So we operate on a different thing. And And down in the United States, it's more balanced, where smaller states have arguably more representation within the House and the Senate than their population. So it's more balanced in a broader way. As we always look at the maps of the United States, the Democrats rule the shores, the Republicans rule the center. And that balance through their system, which is convoluted with the college and the Senate and the House, and then the presidency of being directly elected, tends to broaden the base of the electoral vote and its opinion.
But
So when the United States elects all three branches to a particular ideology and party, it is incredible. That is a real power move from in the power, and that's again why Trump is so enforced in what he has. He has a mandate that hasn't been expressed since, I believe, Reagan, which was the last one, and he didn't beat Reagan, but that's where the last time this level of executive power was so reinforced by all the other areas of the US government. In Canada, we're different. And it's so focused on the East that other provinces quite literally have no effect on the election. I'm not sure if it's going to make a political move. Obviously, Polyev has a significant advantage. Just not so much his policies are so wonderful and great. They're obvious. Everyone else is selecting them. But it's more of an anti-Trudeau movement that's happening, and NDP is not in action and no other party. So I think we'll see a move to the Conservative Party. But I don't think it's ideological. And I think this is a real challenge for Canada to be able to engage more than just Ontario and Quebec within Confederation.
Well, I shared with you the other day that if the apportionment of representation in Canada were by GDP contribution versus population, Alberta would have not 39 seats, but would have 61. So that's one of the indications of the tension we have in this country, is some of the imbalances where that Laurentian group, for example, has so much influence because it sits in a high population density area, and you know they do contribute as a province almost as much as Alberta overall. By the way, I want to come back just very briefly to a point you made about the Laurentian group. We had a parallel in the U.S. The president used to be selected before primaries at a convention, and that was often predetermined by a group within a party, a relatively small group, on who would win that convention. Now, with the primaries having the power that they have, a populist has won. There's no way Trump would have been selected had the old model still been in place. He is truly, like it or not, a president of the people. He came out of that primaries. Whether we like it or not, you've got to acknowledge the fact that this guy was elected with a majority now by people. Not
Correct.
necessarily the candidate selected that the party might have selected.
Correct. And
So ask, is he really a true Republican? Is he really a true Democrat? He's almost of a Trumpite.
yes, he's his own party. There's no doubt. He's not a Republican and he's not a Democrat. And you're absolutely right. Usually presidents are vetted by the Council of Foreign Relations, CFR. They run the candidates through and they make the selection of who will move forward. And they play both parties, which means the CFR, Council of Foreign Relations in the United States, always wins. When Reagan came up, he was not a CFR individual, and they allowed him to become the candidate as long as he selected Bush Sr. as his vice president, which and also had great influence on the cabinet he selected. So they couldn't influence Reagan directly, but indirectly. And until Trump, that had not been the case either. So all the other presidents, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, get vetted by the CFR and ensure that their desires and their command follows the CFR's progress. But
Okay.
Trump is different than Reagan, especially as a second term, that he is not a CFR individual. He did not get their vet. He did not get their support, and he won anyway, which is why the deep state of the United States is so fearful of him.
Yeah.
Because regardless of the barriers and the circumstance and the process of vetting the next United States president, he bucked them all and won.
Someone was saying recently, this is not what the founding fathers expected.
Correct.
Randall, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I've been trying with the idea that the old left-right is not telling the whole story anymore. What I get from a lot of people is that they want more local control over their lives, and it's more about populism versus globalism. That is, they see a global elite of billionaires, a billionaires club, kind of trying to dictate to the rest of the world how we should live our lives. And more people are more likely to say no to that, whether they're left or right previously. They want more local autonomy, local control, local governance, and that might mean national patriotism versus being part of the United Nations or
Well,
WEF.
You may be touching on a principle that Trump seems to be following and seems to be apparent in many places. That is delegation away from the center out to the people. We've seen that on the abortion issue, and there may be many other reasons why that was done, but we're seeing it in other powers. What we haven't seen in Canada, and that's why I'd like to get into this discussion. This is still the power in this country still resides with the federal government. We have not gone through the state rights that they went through in the states, and we haven't gone through the provinces standing up to the federal government and saying, it's about time, Daddy, let go, and allow us as provinces to mature. And interprovincial trade would be one of the first things that the provinces themselves could push and achieve, although I'm not sure Quebec will play the game. But let's turn to what Canada might do now that it has this opening to begin to discuss what it should become to be more united economically and interprovincially.
Well, that's a big topic. And the challenge within Canada is their motivation to change what is going on. Each province has their own little segment that they want to protect with, internal trade, regardless of what it is. And we've seen Quebec saying no to pipelines and things like that. Our confederation is set up so much differently than the United States. And because the US is so dominant in media and things like that, we believe our system somehow reflects the United States system, but it does not. In confederation, the provinces actually have a tremendous amount of power. However, the provinces have abdicated that power to the federal government for bribes from the federal government, because the federal government can absorb more resources, financial resources, than any individual province can. So the federal government bribes the provinces to abdicate their health care, their immigration, policing, all the sorts of things that are actually part of the provincial jurisdiction. So we have a challenge within Canada, and especially the perception of how Canada works with our own population. And that's a big nut to crack, to get people to think we're not like the United States. We are a confederation, not a federal system. And those two types of words will put question marks in everybody's head and say, what the heck is the difference? And that's the real challenge for all Canadians across our nation. And I think as far as Alberta with Premier Smith, she does understand the difference. And that's why she's the outlier on almost everything when it comes to federal policies, where she's willing to challenge the feds on jurisdictional issues. because she, among all the other premiers and representatives of the provinces and territories, really understands what Confederation's for. Now, on my part, I think she's not going far enough, but that's my own bias and political ideology. But at least she's doing something.
I think Trump might have done us a favor with the interprovincial trade thing, and even Quebec may be getting on board with it because I think they've been startled a bit by his comments as well. But even if they didn't, most of the or a lot of the oil that we get sent to the United States goes by rail, and we could set up an oil shipping port on Hudson Bay and just have to deal with Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Or we could ship our oil to Ontario and have a port at the mouth of the headwaters of the St. Lawrence River. As it is right now, there are a lot of tankers coming in from abroad that are carrying oil down the St. Lawrence Seaway. So Quebec could not have an argument that, we couldn't export oil that way. So I'm just curious why nobody is proposing a plan like that. And then we can get Quebec out of the conversation entirely.
So as a matter of fact, you're absolutely right about the Hudson. It's a great opportunity, and there's numerous plans to utilize the Hudson Bay by Churchill or the other tributary a little bit south. And the challenge is when you cross the provincial border, you involve the feds. And up till, say, present or a little bit past present, the feds have blocked interprovincial pipelines. So we could produce a pipeline up to, say, Lloydminster, but then we'd have to put it on a truck, carry it 100 yards, and put it back in a pipeline. So the Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba do have have signed an agreement for that type of right of way, all the way from Alberta to the Hudson Bay, without the federal's blessing on crossing the borders. Now that might change with Polyev, and then all bets are off, and we'll be able to bypass Quebec very, very easily.
So certainly there has been a lot of discussion in the last week about opening up interprovincial trade, a recognition that this may well be one of the silver linings for Canada to come to grips with something that's been lingering. I remember the Royal Commission under Heinemann here in Alberta. He led a Royal Commission on interprovincial trade with all the right recommendations, but it wasn't executed on. So let's assume that we can make some headway east and west and further integrate on a more balanced basis our north-south pipeline, whether it be pipelines or highways. When I look at the map of Canada, I see a ribbon that runs maybe 300 miles or 500 kilometers from the border, but I also see 6 hours of nothing after that. Isn't this a frontier that Canada could begin to open up? The estimates that I've seen are there's $3 trillion worth of resources sitting undeveloped, and with the U.S. capital to help in investing, wouldn't that further this fortress North America by having some party stand up and say it's about time we started waking up to the fact that we've got a frontier yet unconquered, which would also help us address the Arctic defense?
It absolutely, but all economics and the science of economics is always about human beings. And as you poignantly pointed out, the weather is the defining line between north and south. The lifestyle of the north is very harsh and hard to live in, and very difficult to attract the talent necessary to exploit those resources, notwithstanding all the government and territory and provincial blocks that are set up currently to block that. The North has always been there to develop, but the people, it really requires a hardy individual of pioneer spirit and robustness and resilience that our current society, I believe, just doesn't produce in the volumes necessary to exploit. It's the same issue with Siberia and Russia. Massive resources, but still undeveloped, unattainable, and it's simply because people hesitate going into an environment and a
Bill,
weather that's
Bill,
not tropic. Let's be pointed.
Siberia is far more developed than the North in Canada. I mean, you might counter and say, well, it was developed through labor camps and gulags, et cetera, and you're probably right. But when you look at what exists in Siberia as an infrastructure, it's got a lot more Yellowknives than we have.
Correct. Yeah, you're right.
I still make my case, and as you know, I see the weather as Canada's best defense system, but it also may be countering our own attempt to develop the North. I think that's overstated. I think with Hudson Bay up there, with the Mackenzie River up there, with global warming, with the fact that there's $3 trillion worth of resources sitting up, and the United States uses those resources and wants to become self-sufficiency is a very important security, a very important principle for them. I think this is the time to open up a discussion about Canada's North and development. We got SMRs coming. One of the biggest impediments to development in the North is access to energy. But with SMRs, you've got a chance now to begin to plant power sources in the North that might give you the energy for mining, because that's what people point to. When I worked with the manager of the Yellowknife Inn, and he pointed out to me when I thought Yellowknife was closing down because of the separation with Iqaluit and Yellowknife and gold beginning to fade as a investment opportunity, but diamonds were emerging. He said, look east, young man, from Yellowknife, and you will see land that is loaded with opportunities that we haven't even scratched the surface between there and Labrador, which is what 40% of Canada is untouched, literally untouched. That's the boreal forest, by the way. Now that forest doesn't yield wood that you can use because it's all twisted because of the sun. It's so far north. But I think you'd get a politician that could win a few votes by creating jobs in the north and continued economic development for this country, far beyond just doing what Quebec wants each year and what Ottawa wants each year and what Alberta does. We got a future that we haven't even talked about yet.
Far north of Canada, in fact, is a really huge underdeveloped area that we have had decades to exploit, but it's not been required because we've been exploiting further south. But as the climate's warming and geopolitics is changing the world's balance and the potential for trade through the Northwest Passage as well as the Eastern Passage, we're going to see a lot of shipping and various other activities in the northern regions, especially the Arctic Ocean.
I mean, good point. And Jeff makes that on the chat as well. The Arctic Ocean is beginning to open up as a point for Northwest Passage. The Mackenzie River is the longest river in North America, longer than Mississippi, longer than the Missouri, not longer than the two combined. But with the transportation opportunities we have in the North, with global warming, with the fact that it's unexplored, looking for investment opportunity, and with this Fortress North America concept, it seems to me some politician ought to stand up and say, let's begin a discussion about the economic opportunities as yet unexplored in Canada.
The other thing I think is very important to consider for Canadians in their decision making is, of course, we have America to our south,
Right.
and America's enemy, and to some degree, a Canadian not so happy place, is Russia, and it's to our north.
Right.
So, I mean, we are the battleground of the Cold War and may still be a battleground in some emerging war.
As Bill was saying earlier, that Trump is really a disruptor. If you're going to negotiate with somebody and you don't know what they're like, you're going to do something that'll really knock them off balance. And their reaction, if you compare, say, Ford and Smith, totally different opposite ends of the spectrum. So Trump can sit back and now determine how he's going to negotiate. He won't go down to that level. He'll negotiate country to country. But negotiations with him are quite a different story. I would doubt in his whole career so far that he has ever received real candid feedback from anybody who said they were loyal to him, other than maybe Melania.
Mel, what's your view, Mel,
Or
on the
Cohen.
Do you think that's dead, or do you think that's going to find its way back to the table somehow?
Sorry, the view on what?
51st state,
Uh,
either 51st or 62nd, depending upon which way,
I
if
don't
any,
know. I think
seriously.
my gut feel is that it will never happen. Uh, Things will have to get a lot worse for Canada before people start saying, hey, maybe this is the easy way out. Tommy might have a comment there.
Well, it's a form of Fortress North America. Is maybe it doesn't have senates, and maybe it doesn't have proportional representation in the House of Representatives. Maybe it's just with the trade agreement that's forthcoming, and I think that was part of what he was negotiating, was to get that trade agreement that he had signed out in the open again, to further integrate the economy, so that imbalance is either acknowledged, because it's really a subsidy both ways.
If we could, yeah, if we could rephrase that Fortress North America to Fortress North of America, that would make a whole different. You know, if we could look at this as a real big wake-up call, a hit on the side of the head with a 2x4, and get our own act together, the interprovincial trade stuff, getting Quebec on board and everything else, that will solve a heck of a lot of our problems.
Well, that's what I'm hoping is the silver lining, is the recognition by Canada of just how great it can be. I mean, we talk about making America great again. I think Canada's got to echo a similar sentiment, that it has neglected its economy for way too long. By the way, what's going on in Ottawa when you had your hockey game a few days ago, Peter, is embarrassing, because Canadians should not be booing; they should be laughing. I think
It's
that would make
interesting. The media has covered it from both points of view.
well, it'd make a much stronger impression, I think, if Canadians were to laugh at what's been going on in the States instead of booing it. By the way, in no way USA seems to be the message of the future Olympics. Tommy, we didn't hear anything from Prince Edward Island today, and you're at the other end of the border, and sometimes.
Where's Tom?
Okay, so sure. I don't know if any of you read Gwen Dyer's editorial in the newspapers yesterday, but I found it very convincing about his seriousness, that Trump is very much out to want to incorporate Canada into the United States. And he's doing that by trying to sow all kinds of confusion, because if there is confusion, the person who's got the plans will come out ahead. But along the way, when he's doing that, when he makes all this confusion, it puts him in a much more powerful person than without the confusion. Confusion also, I'm sure, enables him to make profit. You can make profit on the stock market when stocks go down. You can make profit on the stock market when they go up. And he knows exactly when they're going to go down. He knows when they're going to go up. And I'm sure he isn't ignoring those opportunities either. And finally, I think he's got a long-term plan again for wanting to take over Canada, because I think he may also be aware of the fact that with climate change, large portions of central western United States are going to be very much desperate need of water.
Water is an extraordinary asset. I think it was Thomas Keenan many years ago who talked about building a canal from Slave Lake right through into California. But yes, water may be the basis of a war or of an agreement.
Been the basis of war in the Middle East a number of times.
Yeah.